everyone, welcome to Starting Out Solitary. This is MonsoonMagick, your Wednesday host, and this week we are talking about magic, specifically magic that has failed. So before we begin, I want to apologize for uploading this so late on Wednesday. I was out of town again. I only have a couple weeks before I have to go back to work for school, and so we're trying to get in every vacation possible. I still have 2 more, and I've got 2 weeks left, so it was a little hard. I did not want to do the video on the road because I really wanted to show you this book, Instant Magic by Christopher Penczak. This is the book I'm currently reading. I cannot recommend this book highly enough if you are interested in learning about the science of spellcraft. Jake mentioned that yesterday, that he believes that spell work and magic work is a science. I absolutely 100% agree. I believe that there is a structure to it, and this book, Christopher Penczak, again, he supports that as well, and he definitely lays out almost the anatomy of a spell and the components that go into it. So I wanted to talk about this. In fact, I'm going to read a quote from this book for you. So, in terms of magic and spell work, it has never been a huge part of my practice. When I came to a pagan path, I did not come through the allure of magic or spell work. In fact, I was very hesitant to do any type of magical working at all. And in fact, it hasn't been until I would say the last maybe 3-4 months that I've really started studying magic from a scientific perspective and getting a better understanding and kind of wrapping my brain around what it means and how it was related to my path and my practice. As I've mentioned before, I was raised Catholic, and then I was a very evangelical Christian for a few years there. And so magic and spell work had a very negative connotation to me. It's still something I'm working through. I would say for the most part, that stigma's gone now that I feel like I've developed a better understanding of what magic is. Because honestly, I think we are all performing magic constantly, whether we realize it or not. Christopher Penczak talks about that it's your thought forms, and we can either choose to consciously create those thought forms and send them out to the universe, or we can unconsciously do it. They're still being created, and they're still going out into the universe. So we are always engaging in magic. In fact, one of the quotes on the back of his book says that every thought you think is magic. So I think that it's really shifted my perspective on what magic is and how it relates to me. I don't believe you need any tools. That's why I kind of have this crystal out. I don't believe you need any tools whatsoever to perform any type of magical working. I do not think that your magical working will be any more powerful with or without the tools. To me, it's a personal preference. There is another book by Starhawk where she talks about why we use tools like crystals and incense, music, not meditation, different representations in our magic. And really it's to get out of our left hemisphere and shift our thinking into the right hemisphere and think more symbolically and energetically. I do think that crystals absolutely can add their energy, but I think that, and Penczak talks about this too, you can just as potently envision the crystals that you would want. So if you are someone who doesn't have a ton of funds to put into buying all kinds of crystals and herbs and all that kind of stuff, this book is amazing because he talks about how through our intent and when you get into that deep meditative state, you can literally envision in your mind the tools that you would want. So that it's instant magic because you can perform it anytime, anywhere. Okay, so back to the topic of magic, our biggest magic fails. First of all, it's going to be kind of semantics here, but I don't believe that magic ever fails. Do spells sometimes not work? Yes, but I wouldn't say that that is a failure in any sense of the word. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a quote to you here in just a second from Christopher Penczak, but basically what he believes is that when you align your magical workings with your true will and your life's purpose, and when all of that is in alignment, that creates very powerful magic. He also believes that when you, let's say you cast a spell for a new job, if it doesn't work, that could then be a clue into perhaps this isn't in alignment with your life's purpose. And so by looking at spells that work really, really well, we can get clues as to what is our life's purpose and our true will. And by looking at spells that did not work, that's also just as important of a clue as to what might not be part of our life's purpose. I'm going to pause for a second so I can open up the book to the quote I want to read to you, and then I'll be right back. So give me just a sec. Okay, I'm back, and as you can see, I've been marking up this book. So this is from page 20. He has a chapter called The Anatomy of a Spell, which is absolutely fascinating if you want to understand the scientific principles that go into spell work. But what he says, this is at the bottom of 20, he says, when we work magic, we find our true will by examining what is supported and what is not. We work through our desires, discovering what is healthy and what is not. We work through our fears, blocks, and egos. Those spells that do not manifest usually are not for our highest good, and we can more fully examine why we wanted to do them in the first place. By noting the spells that work best, we find experiences that support our higher will. Now, he does go on to say that if a spell doesn't work, you do need to consider your technique and your spellcraft before you just automatically say, well, it's not for my highest good, because there is a science behind magic, and he says if we choose to work with tools that conflict with our intention, then he does use the word fail, but your spell could fail or it might not work. So what that tells me is that spell work is a really, really awesome way to find out what really is for our highest good and what works in alignment with our life purpose. And I'd never considered that before. So it's actually really opened me up much more to the idea of working spell work in terms of really finding out what is for my highest good and what isn't. Now, I do have one story that I'm going to tell you about a spell. I wouldn't say that it was a failure, but it did teach me a lesson. So about a month ago, we were coming home, and we were driving home from being up at our cabin, and on the drive home, there are a lot of elk and a lot of deer, a lot of elk specifically. And normally we try to leave before it gets dark because the elk like to come out at dusk, and they're big, and if you hit an elk, you are in big trouble. My husband actually works with someone whose son was killed in a car accident. He wasn't even the driver because they hit an elk. So elk are dangerous. You don't want to mess around with them. So anyway, we usually try to leave before dusk, but for whatever reason, we were leaving late. And I was really getting worried about the elk on the road. So I decided before we left that I would do a working for protection and basically ask for protection around the car and for our drive home, and that no animals whatsoever would enter the roadway. That it would almost be like they could see us coming, that there would be a luminescent orb around the car that the animals could see, and that way they wouldn't come into the road. So I did my working, and we got in the car and drove home, and we didn't see one animal, not one. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was so wonderful. It was safe. I felt really good the whole drive home. Well, a couple weeks later, we went on a road trip, and we started driving, and we're driving through areas where there's supposed to be a lot of animals, and it's during the day, and we're not seeing a thing. Not a thing. And I'm like, what is going on? Why aren't we seeing any animals? We were in a national park where there are tons of animals. And again, nothing. Not a thing. And all of a sudden I realized I didn't put a time limit on that spell, and I never released the spell. So maybe the car is still under that same spell that I put it under, and that's why we're not seeing anything, because at this time we wanted to see stuff. It was safe. It wasn't at night, and we weren't worried about, animals running out in front of the car. So as soon as that struck me, like, oh my gosh, you didn't release the spell, I, got into my meditative state, released the spell, and literally within 3 minutes, we started to see animals again. It was crazy. So I did learn through that experience about once a spell is cast, remembering to release the spell, and also setting a time frame on it. So I could have originally said for this drive home. So that was kind of interesting. It did teach me some things. I want to just real quickly show you this book. It's called Instant Magic by Christopher Penczak. It's much smaller than his temple books, It is absolutely phenomenal. I've been taking so many notes in here. I'm just going to show you the table of contents so it gives you a good idea of like what the book is about. So chapter 1 is he talks about what is instant magic. Chapter 2 is all the anatomy of a spell, and he really does lay it out in a very scientific way. He uses a lot of analogies to computer programming and how computers work, and it's really cool. It actually really makes sense. Chapter 3 is the world of magic, and he goes through different belief systems from elements and different things like that. Then chapter 4, he actually goes into he gives you some instant magic spells that he's used. 5 is spell crafting, how to craft them yourself, advanced instant magic, instant healing, and the magical life. And then he has a ton of wonderful correspondence charts. This book, if you want to find out more about magic from a more scientific perspective of what exactly am I doing and what are the components of spell work and why do we have those parts and how do they all fit together, I cannot recommend this book enough. So it's called Instant Magic by Christopher Penczak. If you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear your thoughts on magic in general, how you believe it works. Anything like that. Thank you so much for joining us for another week at Starting Out Solitary. Don't forget to check out all of the personal channels because everybody has some really awesome personal channels. Like the Facebook page, and please, 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 please feel free to comment below. Until next week, have a very, very blessed night.